And there's nothing uncommon about that right there at all. Even though there's an entire trough over there, these two are always going to fight. They're close to the same age, close to the same size. And I want you to think really hard about you and your brothers and sisters and how you also would fight for no reason. And now I'm going to tell you a story that you're going to want to hear. It's called The Inner Animal. I'm going to tell you a story called Your Inner Animal. It's about me and my brother, the one we call Uncle Dan, and a lesson that my dad taught us about your inner animal. Y'all stick around and hear my story. It's a good one. And it might be one that could save your life. Yes, the story I'm going to tell you is one that might could end up saving your life if you can somehow connect to your inner animal. And that inner animal, believe it or not, it's in us all. I want you guys to watch how beautiful this is. Look, everyone's here. Everyone's here. Even the babies are at the hay, the roll of hay. I'm about to pour out some grains. If y'all don't mind, I didn't want to pour these out. Move out of the way. Look, even the babies are here. Y'all, even the babies are here eating hay. I love this. I love this. I need two hands for what I got to do right now, y'all. Give me a second. Well, they're here. They may not be eating, but they are here. They are a part of the family, okay? They're a part of the family, the Longhorn family. I'm so proud of them for coming down and being a part of everything, hanging out, eating some hay, grazing on the grass. Look at them. They're trying. So in case you're wondering, there's plenty of extra piles of grain scattered here and there. And I always put extra piles of grain, always. So nobody has to be without. Now, you know, they'll naturally walk around and kind of move each other from pile to pile. But there's always a pile to go to. There's always more piles than you have animals. So Ruby and Danny will have to learn their role, especially against the goats. They can't let the goats take over their grains. And as they get a little bit older and develop more confidence, they will move the goats out of the way. Goats will normally, goats will kind of like begin to share with each other so as they'll have something to eat. But as of right now, Ruby and Danny still don't know quite where they stand on the hierarchy, on the pecking order. And so they're going to end up skipping this meal. I hate that. They'll skip this meal. Maybe not, maybe not, maybe not. Guys, did you see what just happened? Did y'all notice that Jolene just moved the goats out of the way to give Danny and Ruby a pile of grain? Did anyone else just notice what happened right there? Jolene, as much as y'all give her a hard time for being such a little whiny, pouty princess, she just moved the goats out of the way to offer a pile of grain to Danny and to Ruby. And I love her for that. And she's like, eat, you little twerp. You need to eat, because if not, you're going to be a skinny butt like my mama. And that is true. We all know that our beloved Pearl over there in the back is a skinny butt. She's always been a skinny butt, and she'll always be a skinny butt because she just will not, she can't gain any weight. The story I'm going to tell you is one that you might not want to hear, but it's a true story, and it takes me back to my childhood, And I will also say this. The lesson that my dad taught me with this story is one that saved me at least 3 times in my life. My dad tells a story about when he was going through boot camp during the Vietnam War, and how because of the guerrilla warfare tactics that the Viet Cong were using against the U.S. soldiers, your drill sergeants begin to teach a different type of hand-to-hand combat. It wasn't a traditional method, the way 2 guys face off and begin kind of a boxing match and they get into a grapple. No, instead they had taught the soldiers how to bring out their inner animal. Because in fact, the Viet Cong, who were a lot smaller in stature than what the American soldiers were, would realize that if you get into those kind of situations in combat where it turns into hand-to-hand combat, then the American soldier had a superiority as far as size and stature and strength and whatnot. So the Viet Cong were in fact the masters of using their inner animal. And what they would do when they got into combat is use every resource available to them to win that hand-to-hand combat. Because in fact, during wartime, hand-to-hand combat really is a matter of life and death. So it wasn't uncommon to go into a battle scene. This is going to be kind of gory, my friends. It was not uncommon to find a battle scene where you had American soldiers who had found with their eyes gouged out, not from some kind of torture, it's from the combat. Ears bit off, the cheek bit off. So what was happening was the Viet Cong were using every resource available to them to win hand-to-hand combat type of fights. And they were in fact becoming like you would find an animal, like if you were to have to fight a wolf or coyote or bear or lion, and they would in fact use their claws and use their teeth and use every resource available to them. And so what my dad said was that the Viet Cong, the American soldiers, they had a fear factor of having to find themselves in a hand-to-hand combat scenario with a much smaller Vietnamese army. And when I say smaller, I mean size and stature. So, to make a long story short, American soldiers began to kind of take on the tactics of the inner animal. And they would teach them to use their sound, to amplify their voice, the same way a cougar may scream, or a lion may roar, a bear may growl. You would teach that when you went into that combat scenario to use your voice, to scream, to holler, to use whatever resource you had as a, I don't know, not so much a fear factor, but they would also teach that when you got into your hand-to-hand combat, don't stand there and puff up and chest up and think you're going to square off with someone who's fighting for their life. It doesn't work that way. In that kind of scenario, you use whatever resource you can, which means you too will use your teeth. You too can use your thumbs to gouge eyes or to rip apart the jaw. Guys, I know it sounds horrible, and you're probably hating me for saying this right now, but it was taught that way, and soldiers were trained that way. And it ended up to where now you had, in fact, if you had a scenario where American soldiers went head-to-head in that hand-to-hand combat with the Viet Cong in the jungles of Vietnam, now you kind of equalize the playing field, because both sides were not opposed to using their inner animal. Inner animal. So Dad told me and my brother Dan that story. And he said, if you ever find yourself in a life or death situation, you should bring out your inner animal. Well, this is where the story gets a little bit sketchy. This is where the story gets a little bit sketchy. I'm going to go ahead and tell you because I love you and I trust you and I hope you won't judge. But during that era, Daniel and I, who are just a couple of years apart, Daniel has always been a bigger kid than me. Bigger as far as, I'm taller than Dan, but he's a whole lot heavier than I am. And that was fine. It was, you know, whatever. I got tall genes and Dan got big genes. But the bottom line is, when Dan and I would wrestle around like brothers do, and like sisters do, it got to a point to where when we were 13, 14, 15, our wrestling matches got to be pretty brutal. And Dan, in fact, normally won most wrestling matches. He was a bigger, stronger guy. And I don't know why, but one day we're sitting there and we're wrestling. I don't know who started it, because it went back and forth. It was always, we're no different than Waylon and Santoro. It doesn't matter who started it. It was just kind of fun to wrestle and to show your strength. All boys and girls do it, y'all. I don't know why, but Dan hurt me to the point to where my dad's story of your inner animal, it showed itself. And all of a sudden, I screamed at the top of my lungs. Can I just say I roared? I just want to say, I want to take that word back. I did not scream. I roared. I let out a bellow at the top of my lungs, which did, in fact, startle Uncle Dan. It froze him in his tracks. It was ear-piercing, and it froze him in his tracks. And I began to claw and scratch, and I'm kind of embarrassed to say this, but I bit him in his back. I did. I bit him in his back. I didn't gouge his eyes out. I didn't fish hook him and rip apart his jaws, okay? I didn't do anything that was gonna leave a mark besides my teeth on his back. And Dan let me go, and since that day, we have never wrestled again. We haven't even arm wrestled. In fact, my little brother Dan goes off crying, and I had learned that tactic of using your inner animal was in fact one that you could use if you had to get out of a bad situation. I'm sorry that I used it on my own family, okay? That was not my intention. And that part you'll have to forgive me for. Please, guys, I know you love Uncle Dan. I love Uncle Dan. And I'm sorry my inner animal came out. But it did. This story's not over. A couple of years later, I found myself riding the school bus, high school age, and there were a group of 3 boys who sat on the very back seat of the bus that my dad drove. My dad drove my school bus. And I was sitting there talking to some young lady. Sheila was her name. I always sit with her. And at some point, a wad of paper came flying past my head. I turned around. I knew who it came from. I didn't know if it was meant for me or not, but I knew where it came from. And I just kind of make eye contact to let them know that I know. A couple of seconds later, another wad of paper, a big old wad of paper come flying by, and it landed in the seat with us. Didn't hit me, didn't hit her. And so I took the wad of paper and I turned around and I says, I don't know what I said, not here, not now, stop it, whatever. Trying to deter. I'm trying to deflect and say, hey, I'm not today. Today's not today. A few seconds later, a third wad of paper comes by and hits me in the back of the head. Listen to me, y'all. At that point, I knew what I had to do. This is the embarrassing part of my story. But I did, in fact, bring out my inner animal. They were 3 seats behind me. I remember that for some reason, my mind, the human in me, shut itself off. It shut off. And some kind of horrible noise came out of my mouth as I got out of my seat. And it felt like one step and I was on top of this seat where these 3 boys were sitting. 3 best friends who all got off at the same bus stop. And I kid you not, the inner animal in me, one grabbed one kid's hair. I grabbed his hair the way girls might pull hair. I grabbed this kid's hair, curly-haired kid I remember, and I jammed him up against the kid by the window, and I began to just kick and scream and holler. I don't think I bit this kid, but the kid on the outside, who was the largest of all, is the one that took the force of my inner animal. My dad pumped them brakes. He hit them brakes so hard that I went tumbling over into the aisle. The kid who was on the outside, the one I was having to fight with, his name was KJ. I remember my initials was KJ. He also went tumbling, and he got up crying. He got up crying. The kid who I grabbed his hair, who I was shaking while I was kicking and biting the other, while I was kicking and hollering at the other one, he got up crying. The third kid was a little fat kid. He didn't move. He was like he was glued to that window. He was glued to that window. And Dad called us up to the front to sit down in the seat in the front. He made everyone get out of the front seat and made me and KJ sit there. The rest of that bus ride home, KJ kept crying. The kid in the back kept crying. And that entire bus was just... My dad, whenever we unloaded the bus, I remember he told me he was proud of me. But he had to give me a bus report. He was proud of me for doing what I had to do. But he also had to give me a bus report because he couldn't let it go. It was a fight. It was a fist fight on the bus. Even though there was never any fist. There was never a fist flown. There was never a fist. It was an animal type attack. It was a straight up animal type attack. No fist whatsoever were ever thrown. But everything else was Waylon's. It's not liking that noise at all. That's my inner animal, y'all. Sorry. I got a bus report, and I got called to the principal's office, and those are the days when they still gave licks, pops, with a paddle. And so Mr. Aston, his name was Mr. Aston, A-S-S-T-O-N, Mr. Aston, or it may have been A-S-T-O-N. Mr. Aston, whatever his name was, stood me and KJ up together, and we got called in together. Of course, he asked for an explanation. I said my side, the paper. KJ said his side. It wasn't me. Bottom line is, he gave us both pops, and I've never been hit so hard in my life. I would have rather KJ's inner animal hit me, if he even has one, than Mr. Aston's inner animal, because his inner animal didn't require any noises. It just required the hand on a board when he come in and laid a pop on my behind that I will never forget. But that was the first time that I had used my inner animal in a combative type situation. I'm not telling you all to go out there and find your inner animal and attack your siblings or that lady at church who thinks she's better than you. Don't do that, y'all. But if you ever find yourself in a really bad situation, Waylon really likes this story. He loves talking about, he needs to learn some inner animal tactics. I'm going to end this by saying that there were 2 more times in my life that I had to show my inner animal. I will also say that even though I've taken quite the beating, the inner animal doesn't always work. But I'm alive now. I'm alive and here with you now, aren't I? So, thank y'all for listening. Thank y'all for being a part of my morning walkabout with the babies. And find your inner animal. Find your inner animal for a just in case you ever need it. Thank y'all. We'll catch you in the next video.
Don't let your troubles fester. Come watch Longhorn Lester.
Yeah, something like that.